There's a very old saying that says, how do you eat an elephant piece by piece? And it's the same in the business world. How do you deal with something that you want to scale that's complex? You start off somewhere, right? And you take incremental steps, because if we assume that we're going to immediately roll out to thousands of houses or households, then we'll be heading for a hiding. So you have to build a systematic approach. Step by step. It is definitely the newer generation is driving some of the change because they look at things differently than the old traditional ways. Give you an example, in South Africa, we have a very conservative approach to capital, moving capital into projects, incredibly risk averse. The important thing that I've learned in life is we sometimes want to make everything as complex as possible because we believe that complexity speaks to our brilliance in a way. But
Certainly, creating a warm and engaging introduction for your podcast, consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts Victoria Cornelio and Andres Tamez. In today's episode, we're talking to Theo Minné on translating vision into action. Theo, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you're going to help us understand a little bit more of this thing? We all have great ideas. Not all of us know how to execute them.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very, very happy to be on your podcast. Very excited with the work that Tangelic is doing and to be part of that. Every week I'm super impressed by the team, so it's really fantastic to be part of this team. And the work that you and Andres is doing is also really fantastic. So well done to you guys as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to take a plan, to take a vision and put it into practice. And most especially, you know, in Africa. And it sounds like maybe a little bit of a cliche, but it's really a difficult region to work within. You have to respect the countries that you work within, but you also have to respect the challenges that you will face, right? And I've worked in more structured countries, and I've worked in very poor African countries. I've worked everything in between, and you learn a lot by working in these countries. You learn about the culture, but you also learn how to adapt and to innovate, strangely enough. So it's been a long road. I think the first time I worked outside South Africa was 1994. I went to Namibia. We did some microwave links there. And there you're working in the desert, right? So that's a different experience.
And how did this journey begin for you? So how did you get into this line of work?
Strangely enough, I started my electronic apprenticeship at a joint venture between Alcatel, the French company, and a local technical company or tech company, Altec, which is called Alcatel Altec. I started as an electronic apprentice. I started building electronic test equipment for a production line for BMW. And shortly after, mobile telecoms came into South Africa. And at this point, they needed a lot of people, and it sounded interesting. And I said, okay, I'll move over to the new division. And there I've stayed in mobile telecoms for many, many years. So my introduction into that was really when I was still very young, in the early part of my professional career. And it's been a roller coaster, you know, because it's fast paced, a lot of risk, a lot of danger. The stuff that we had to do at the fast pace was really risky. And, you know, so it was almost like an addiction. It was an industry that it takes time to get used to, and not everybody can cope with it. But once you're in, you know, you just want more of it.
Yeah. And I can imagine
the challenges. Is it the challenges that are attractive? Is that the addiction?
Mm.
Just like I want to keep on getting past these hurdles.
I mean, in the early days, what was really interesting is there was no cell phone networks, right? So you had to build multiple sites in different locations without a cell phone, because we are so used to it nowadays. It's unthinkable that we don't have, the ability to pick up your phone and immediately phone someone. In those days, you couldn't. If you had a problem, you had to solve it. Or if you wanted to phone your boss, you have to drive to the nearest town and then find a place to phone him. So it was so cool. But we work at heights. We work with civil works. We work with electrical works. Everything was combined into this single point, as rolling out this infrastructure. All these different aspects were combined into this single space. And it was fast paced. I mean, we worked very long hours, a lot of times 7 days a week. We worked nonstop, So it was, you get into that mode. And then when things slow down, you get a little bit frustrated because you're so used to getting, just going, But it was a lot of fun. I think it became more fun when we worked in Africa, because all of a sudden in the early days when we built telco networks in Africa, man, it was such a challenge. Even to get cement was a challenge.
Gosh.
Right? Wow. Yeah, even to get clean water to build was a challenge. So it's a lot of fun. You learn a lot.
Yeah. And I can imagine with so many years in the industry, like you just said, one of the challenges was that you couldn't just phone someone up. What is the biggest challenge now in this day and age that you kind of come across?
I think the telco networks now have become much more complex, because as they added technology layers, these things become much more complex. So your skill set change and how to maintain these networks. But equally, I think what's also happened in the industry, which is a massive challenge, is that the price for certain services was suppressed. Year after year, you had price erosion. Even though a lot of your input cost is inflation related, and some of these things are macro economic related, like fuel prices and things like that. So you would find those two things, two opposing forces. The one is the market wants to push the price down, and the other side, your input cost is higher. And I think that's a big challenge. So that inevitably means you have to hire, when I say cheaper labor, it always sounds terrible, but lower cost labor, and I think that's the challenge. That's the biggest challenge that you would find.
Yeah. And then I can imagine then scaling that up. Something we talk about on the podcast a lot is like, oh yeah, you have a really good idea, but where's the funding? How do we get this to happen? So have you seen any innovations in financing or business models that you believe are promising? Yeah, I mean,
Africa is going through a really interesting phase now when it comes to innovative finance. It's a term that's been thrown around, but it's been used a lot, and it's not only that it's impact finance, but it's conscious finance, and more private equity and family offices are looking at that type of model, which is interesting. It's not a traditional way of looking at finance. It's not just about your IRR or your ROI. It's also about the impact, the lasting impact it can make, the changes that it can bring. And we are seeing more people looking into that. Saying that, it's also interesting to note that Africa has received over the years billions and billions and billions for investment in infrastructure and the likes. You've seen huge amount of investment, right? But what is unfortunate, not a lot of that investment translate to really changing the life of rural communities and poor people.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's corrupt. It's not, because if you build a port, the rural community won't really benefit from any of the economic activity there. It's too far removed from them, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of those practical things, when you look at those investments moving into Africa, didn't really reach the communities for good reason. But I think that's something that I hope that conscious capital will be activated more and more, so that the way they look at their returns, the way they look at their financial risk changes to the extent where those communities can first unlock the suppressed demand and grow from that new demand, and then have the ability to bring the money back into this and into circulation,
Right.
That seems to be a theme, almost a generational thing, right? Like my generation is a lot more jaded on the ROI model, or viewing everything as an ROI thing. They not only are they jaded on it, they don't like it. So like it seems like the future, some sort of change is happening. And do you think that? Do you see that in the newer generation, or is it just a trend in the industry as a whole?
I think it is. It is definitely the newer generation is driving some of the change because they look at things differently than the old traditional ways. I'll give you an example. In South Africa, we have a very conservative approach to moving capital into projects, incredibly risk averse. Even to the point when the 2008 financial crisis hit the US and that spilled over into many other regions across the world, South Africa was affected, but not a lot, because our whole financial system is so risk averse.
Right.
But what we have seen now the last decade, with the young people coming in driving innovation, especially as it relates to tech innovation and especially as it relates to AI innovation, things are changing. The way capital is moving into these things, into these think tanks and incubators, are quite different than what it was a decade ago. So I think the youth is now, in a sort of a way, pressuring the system a bit, the conservative system, to say, hey, hold on, you got to do something here. And which is good. I think it's great. And we need that, I think you need both, to be brutally honest. Mm-hmm. You need to be grounded, but you need that innovation drive as well. You can't have either or,
Yeah. And I think that's something you see when, for example, I work with a lot of senior people who are very well-versed, years of experience, but they've tried everything up to now. And in their heads, there's a lot of thinking of, well, we've tried that already. We can't do that. Or there's new barriers, which to me are helpful. So then when my idea comes through, I'm taking into account these things that you've already said don't work. And let's reshape them because there's a new, this might work this time. Do you think that's kind of how innovation goes? You take the context and work around these ideas, or does a new idea have to come in every time?
I think it's both, really, to be honest. I think sometimes you can innovate on what's there, and sometimes you can, like a visionary, innovate something that's not there. And I think a very good example, and we always use this example as South Africans because we like to brag about Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is typically one of those that saw something that others didn't see possible, right? And so you would have both. I think if you look at the way medical technology innovation happened over the years, that's a good example of something that's evolved consistently, innovate, but innovate on top of what's there. You know what is working because you can't take a chance of someone's life on brand new tech. So you'd rather innovate on something that's really tried and tested and try to improve it. And out of that sometimes come new stuff. But I think AI, and I've read an article last week about the amount of new billionaires in the US that's come into play the last year, and a lot of that stuff is AI driven. And their innovation it's almost out there in the ether, right? It's unbelievable what you can do with AI and the applications that come from that. So there you're going to find brand spanking new innovation that's going to just blow our minds,
Yeah. And a lot of these technologies, do you think they enable us to do the thing we were already going to do? Or is it also a vehicle for us to think about new things that we can do now that this technology is available?
I'm excited about AI, but I'm also scared of AI. I think and the reason for that is I think some of the jobs that people have come accustomed to and have built their whole sort of career on will be under threat, right? I think that's the one thing that we have to deal with in this new era of AI. On the other side, it improves a lot, right? It allows us to access information and models and all sorts of things that we would otherwise not have been able to do it ourselves. So you would find people will innovate more from AI, use AI as a way to innovate. And to improve their life, but I think there will be people that will be badly affected. It has to be. There's no other way.
Yeah.
I also feel like one of the big problems with it is the jumping the gun, right? The bubble, as it sorts, that comes out from the arrival of AI, and how all these big companies are so quick to try and replace people. And then they regret it when the AI does something that it's gonna happen. These big mistakes that it makes because it's not ready yet, right? I think like in the future, it's going to be a fantastic. Right now, it's a fantastic tool. In the future, it's going to be something that lets us do new things. But I really think that it's too soon. It's too soon for a lot of the a lot of the sci-fi ideas that a lot of people think it can do. Just can't.
True. Yeah, absolutely spot on. And I think this is going to be a massive learning curve, not only for us as individuals, but for big corporations, and they're going to be willing to gamble with billions in the process, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it is an industry that has to be shaped like that, because you can't really box it too much. If you box it, you're going to limit it. So, how do you manage this almost boundaryless system in a way? How do you manage that effectively? It's going to look, I think we'll see some brilliant people come out of this, and we'll say, wow, this was really fantastic what they saw in the future with AI. Because I must be honest with you, what I think AI can do is probably scratching the surface, to a micron level. I think really it's that impressive, right?
Yeah, it's untapped. And then I guess that brings us nicely into systems thinking, which is something that you employ in the way that you create and design ideas. How can you explain what that is and how that shapes your perspective around complex environments or the complex environments you're working in?
Yeah, I think the important thing that I've learned in life is we sometimes want to make everything as complex as possible because we believe that complexity speaks to our brilliance in a way. But what I've learned is however complex a situation is, you have to bring it to a level that's simplistic in implementation. Because what you don't want is to burden the people that has to implement, that you are going to task with the implementation, to burden them with an enormous amount of complexity. I'll give you one example. I moved into a new role at ABB, and it was actually just the first time in my life I moved into a business development role, which is really where my passion started. The first 8 years was more in the field and more construction and project management. But when I started at ABB, it was first sales, but then it moved into business development. And in this process, they asked us to look at one specific process. How could we automate that? And I thought, man, this is my chance. I'm going to shine like a star. And I made something so complex, and I felt so proud of it. And the people from head office in Zurich, they were evaluating this thing, and the comment that came back is, no, man, this is technically correct, but it's so complex, and it will take forever for people to implement. And that's the key thing, right? We can make things as thorough as possible and as complex as possible, but it will take forever for people to then follow those steps. So you have to deal with complexity, and by putting it on a blueprint. What do we ultimately want to achieve, right? How do we do that in the most effective way, considering our main goals? In other words, if profitability is a goal, or if speed is a goal, or if quality is a goal, whatever those goals are, we define, and we say, what's the best way to achieve this, the most efficient way for everybody, not only for myself, but for the people who actually have to go and do the work in the field, right? So you gotta take those complex things and then break it down into practical small things, and then simplify it.
Right. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, of simplifying without dumbing it down, right? Because how do you balance that of, this is a simple way of doing it, but I'm not just being condescending and telling it to you like a toddler?
Well, sometimes you have to, right? I think sometimes being that simplistic is really, really helpful. I constantly do that. Even if I'm in more complex conversations, I'm trying to just make it practical. And you will probably hear that a lot when I speak in the meetings that we have. I will say, look, I'm just really pragmatic. I want to be practical. Let's just try to make this very practical. And I do that for a reason, because, and then this is going to sound terrible, but I don't mean it like that. We don't need a lot of fluff when we have to deal with real world stuff. We need practical, simple solutions. And if there's a shortfall in what we are proposing, then we'll know soon enough. If it's too mundane in our thinking, we'll know, because you're going to implement it. And then you're going to realize, all right, I have missed a step. We maybe just have to add this additional step. And that happens a lot. Honestly, I can tell you. And we've worked on projects where we started, let's say, the first 50 sites. We iron this thing out. How do we deal with the first 50? Then we scale that to 500 sites. And then you realize, okay, hold on a sec. I have to add another step but I can reduce this step. There's always that process innovation to make sure you can scale, because scaling is unbelievably complex, and especially in Africa.
Yeah. And is that because it's very context-based, or what's that challenge when it comes to scaling?
I think for Africa, logistics is one of the key things, right? Just moving stuff to where it needs to go is sometimes, it will take a huge amount of the time in your time plan. Logistics will take a lot of that. Then you have to plan around it. And of course, then you have to deal with the weather, because if it rains, you can't access a road for a week. You can't get there, and I've had it. When I worked in Rwanda, where we had, from Kigali, the capital, down south to the southern tip there by Lake Kivu. If there's a place where you drive through the jungle, right, and it's beautiful, it's absolutely stunning, and then it goes into the mountains. But if it rains, there are massive rock slides. Then, in other words, you will drive 5 hours to get there, only to realize the road is closed. Then you have to drive 5 hours back, right, and it's a very dangerous road. And then you got to wait until someone tells you the road is open, and that could be a week, that could be a month. So logistics is the biggest risk to make sure you can scale, right? And that's the big challenge, especially rural communities.
Yeah. And it's so important because of what you were saying, that a lot of the innovation is happening in urban settings, and rural communities can't really access that. So when you scale into rural or off-grid communities, what's the goal there? Why are you scaling that way?
I think we're scaling into the rural communities because that's firstly where a big need is, right? I think that's something that we want to see economically change for those rural communities. We want to see, we want to see more women partaking in economic activities. In other words, not just collecting wood or water, but actually get involved with agro process in some way or another, and make sure that output can reach a market somewhere and they can earn a living, a different type of living. So our challenge, I think, as Tangelic would be, how do we scale into areas that don't have a lot of the infrastructure that you typically would find in Accra, right, and in the capital of Ghana. Things that you take for granted in Accra, you would not be able to find up north. I'll give you another example. When we worked in the DRC, right, and we had to move material around and cement and pieces of steel and stuff, we would ship them into it's not Lubumbashi, it's the other one, Kinshasa. We would ship them into Kinshasa. Then we would hire an Antonov plane, a Russian plane. Then we would fly it to the area where it's safest enough for them to land close to that village where we need to build that tower, right? But we still can't get there. Then we offload all the stuff. We put it onto boats. We then go upriver, right, with the stuff. And then ultimately we get to close to the village, but it's not quite there. Then guys with mopeds are waiting, and we're taking small piece by piece with mopeds, and we're driving it to the site. Right? And that's how we move material. So I think those type of challenges that we will find going north into Ghana, they will be there, right? If we want to
it's sort of like you have to make sure everything else is efficient, because this definitely won't be. Yeah. This is one part of the process. It just cannot be.
yeah, exactly. And the sad part of that equation is that it means the cost per unit is much higher to build there than in Accra. But then you're building it for those who are really poor. Mm-hmm. And that's really sad. It's a reality, but it's sad because it means whatever you can put into the ground in Accra will be probably 30% less in cost than if I do it in the northern part of Ghana. That's going to be the big challenge. That's why the way we combine our solutions, the way we put our solutions together needs to be really effective.
It's one of those situations where the ones you want your product to reach the most are the hardest to reach, but you have to reach them. That's the whole point of the project or whatever you're doing.
That's right. That's absolutely spot on.
Yeah, it's a hard one to walk. And then because they are so off-grid, these communities, right? How do we then balance high-level corporate institutional partners and working with them while also ensuring that communities remain empowered and central to the project design? Because like Andres said, the point is for them to access this, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is where you got to be so innovative commercially, right? And when I say commercially, I mean all the way from the cost of the system, the longevity of the system, because there's initial capital cost, but there's an ongoing operational, cost as well, which is quite important to note, especially in Africa, because it's higher as a percentage of your capex. But you also have to be innovative in the funding, the types of funding that you can apply to it, right? And then you have to be innovative in the revenue streams that you unlock, because that's the only way where if these communities have something that on a daily basis really generates money for them, then it's something they will continue to do. And if they continue to do it, then we'll be continuing to receive some benefits from that on our side. And that means that the investors that got involved initially will also benefit from that. That's why it's important to lock all three of those things in. It's not either or. If one leg doesn't work, then yeah, the thing will screech to a halt,
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I guess that's where the system thinking comes in, right? It's very complex, but we gotta make it as simple as possible, as straightforward as possible. And then how do you communicate that to the workforce? How do you tell the people you're working with, this is the game plan, this is what we're doing?
I always believe that you have to align everybody first and foremost behind a strong vision, which I think Justin has done really well, right? And I think that is the most important thing. And don't muddy the water with the vision. Don't try to add too many things. I think that's the first thing. Just keep the vision clear and simple. Let people get behind that, because they will be energized to get behind it. And then, of course, it's a step-by-step approach. There's a very old saying that says, how do you eat an elephant piece by piece? And it's the same in the business world. How do you deal with something that you want to scale that's complex? You start off somewhere, right? And you take incremental steps, because if we assume that we're going to immediately roll out to thousands of houses or households, then we'll be heading for a hiding. So you have to build a systematic approach, step by step. We'll do 95 houses, guys. Let's do a lessons learned. How did we do? Where did we didn't do so well? All right, how do we improve? Let's do the next one and the next one. And this is how we build a huge amount of infrastructure in Africa. It's exactly that. We started off with a small pocket in, let's say, in the DRC. We would build sites in Kinshasa first. Get to know the policies, get to know the tax laws, get to know regulation, get to know the logistics, get to know stuff. Mm-hmm. And this is the same approach that we'll do with our workforce, is to say, we're only going to do this now, right? So let's focus only on this. I know we have a big plan. That's a vision. No, settle down. We're only focusing on this now. And I think that's our role as well, all of us at Tangelic. It's our role to always pull back to something that's simplistic. Because I think sometimes the people get so excited about the vision, and then, want to make it so complex. So we have the responsibility, and I do it constantly with Justin and Jason. I'll say, guys, hold on a sec. Let's just settle this thing down. Let's understand a little bit better. And I do that because I want that same mindset on their part as leaders of Tangelic, to then, also make sure that they translate that back to the workforce from their side as well.
Yeah. And then in your experience, so many years in all these roles that you've had, what is the defining leadership lesson that you've learned in driving complex execution?
Well,
I know existential.
I almost drink a lot. No, I'm kidding. No, I think you got to just keep at it, right? The most important thing that we've learned in Africa is we've had so many setbacks. Some of the projects we worked on, we could only do the work if the UN Army protected us, because we worked in dangerous areas. But we would have never built those sites if we gave up, right? So I think the most important thing, I know it's cliche, but it's so true, and I've lived this many times. There are many things that we can deal with complexity and put a system in place and so on. But our grit to drive it through, our consistency, our effort, our non-stop effort, that's the winning recipe, really. And that's the most important thing. I've worked on big projects. I've secured big projects for ABB and Ericsson, but I've worked on small projects that were disasters, but they were equally important in the process, right? Mm-hmm. Is to drive through there, and because you learn a lot.
Yes, to keep at it. And it's really hard to keep at it when, all these challenges come up and when everyone feels a bit hopeless sometimes. So what advice would you give someone who is embarking on this journey to make their vision practical and have impact?
I think you need if you're just starting this thing up, let's say you're starting something up yourself, right? I think you need to find a good mentor, right? I think that helps a lot. Someone to ground you. If you're in an organization that's starting up, like typically Tangelic, I think the most important thing that we have is each other at this point. And to be open and honest with one another. I had a call with someone yesterday, I won't mention her name. She asked me, she said, look, I've received this, but I'm not sure how to tackle this. And I said, okay, but you just be really pragmatic and be honest to yourself. And then honest to the person that gave you this instruction. If you don't believe there's something that can be done here, then be open and honest. Say, I can't find the link here. And that's the important thing for us. Then in the future, you know, when we scale and we deal with a lot of complexity, then we have the bonds. We have the transparency between us so that we can deal with things. The last thing we want as Tangelic is that we all of us sit in our little corner and we start bad-mouthing this one and we like don't want to do this anymore. The organization will implode, to be honest.
Yeah, it's that thing that the workforce kind of makes the organization. And you in so many leadership roles have probably seen how true that is. We're going to ask you more about this on the blog section. Thank you so much for being here, Theo. We're going to stay on for a couple more minutes to get you guys some really juicy insights from Theo's amazing career that you can find on the blog at tangeliclife.org. This was Theo Minné, translating vision into action. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.